you everybody for joining. My name is Eric Clay. I am Flare's Director of Marketing, and with me today is Amanda. Amanda, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to. So I'm Amanda Scheldt. I'm one of the security researchers here at Flare. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you on today, Amanda. So today we're going to be talking about the typology of illicit Telegram channels. So I'm going to start by giving a kind of a brief overview to those who may not be as familiar with Telegram. So we see today cybercrime is increasingly moving off of traditional dark web, so Tor, and onto Telegram channels. And there's a few different reasons for this. The first reason that threat actors are moving off of Tor is really slow. Logging onto the dark web, downloading things from the dark web, it can take hours. It can even take days or weeks in some cases, depending on the file size. Secondly, Tor is very, very heavily monitored by law enforcement, the FBI, all types of international law enforcement. Telegram is also very likely monitored heavily by law enforcement, but it doesn't seem so. And one of the core reasons for that is when you send a Telegram message, it's very much like a modern social media platform. The Telegram message pops up and it goes away. And I think that lends threat actors like a sense of security almost, like, oh, if my messages are anonymous, it's gone. In reality, of course, law enforcement, CTI companies, all types of organizations are collecting massive amounts of data from all of those Telegram channels. It's all being archived. And in some ways, it's even easier to track than traditional dark web. And then kind of the final reason, and this is really an economics reason, right, is on the traditional dark web, you have marketplaces. And marketplaces are typically owned by an individual or a group. And they really act as the mediators or facilitators of illicit transactions to really prevent people from getting scammed. And ironically, they run scans themselves, which I'll mention in a moment. But in this specific case, right, if I'm a threat actor, what I could do is I could hack into a company and I could sell their data on a dark web market. And then when I actually sold that data, the marketplace would act as an escrow service for me. So they would collect the money, they would verify the data, and only then would they pay me the money and give the customer the data. So really acting as that middleman. Now, the problem with that approach is there's this concept on the dark web called exit scamming. And that's basically when the marketplaces get so much cryptocurrency and money at once doing this escrow service that they just walk away and they say, okay, this is all our money now. See you guys later. And this has happened many, many times across many different dark web marketplaces. So in reality, they may prevent you from being scammed by the vendor and then they'll just scam you themselves. Now, Telegram has an opposite business model. Telegram, threat actors can sell, I call it the Trader Joe's method of selling. So they cut out the middleman and the vendors are selling direct to consumers. So threat actors will set up their own channels, they'll build reputation by giving away data, et cetera, and then they'll just sell that data directly to the consumers. So this leaves cybersecurity programs in an awkward spot, right? A lot of cybersecurity programs have invested in monitoring traditional dark web forums, dark web marketplaces, et cetera. Now the threat landscape has expanded dramatically beyond that. We count over 4,000 Telegram channels that we're monitoring today. And it becomes very difficult because unlike a traditional dark web marketplace, which may take a while, it takes some development time, it takes some effort to set up and take down. You can set up a threat actor can set up a Telegram channel in 5 minutes and also take a Telegram channel down in 5 minutes. And there's very little moderation on Telegram. So today we're going to be talking about the types of illicit Telegram channels. And I'm going to take this moment to hand it over to Amanda to tell us about some of the common types and characteristics of illicit Telegram channels we monitor. And I'm going to make one more note before you start talking, Amanda, which is that one of the really interesting things compared to a dark web marketplace, like if you go to Alpha Bay, you can buy data leak services, you can buy drugs, you can buy guns, there's all sorts of things you can buy. Telegram channels tend to be very specific. You don't go to one Telegram channel to buy drugs, guns, and data breaches. You really go to buy like whatever that specific channel is selling. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Amanda, and you can talk about the different things people buy and sell on Telegram.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Definitely. So you are very much correct on that. It's honestly, Telegram, doing the research that we did, it actually felt a little bit more organized based on the type of like fraud or type of scheme that they were trying to run. The most predominant ones that I found whenever I was doing the research on there was financial fraud. There were countless groups that you could join, and they were public, so you didn't have to do any kind on the dark web. Sometimes you have to kind of work with members of the forum, or you have to engage with members of the forum a little bit to actually be able to successfully join it. Telegram, there was such a public facing entity about it that you could literally just search for carding and you would find probably like 10 different channels that you can join that were very much public. Anybody could join. All you had to do is just join the channel. So that was the most predominant type of fraud that was happening on Telegram that I found. Of course, there were other things that were going on. We found Russian hacktivist groups on there. We found DDoS groups on there. We found Stealer logs, botnets. People were selling botnets on there. That was quite interesting. And several of these illicit channels that we studied uncovered several different types of criminal activity. And like I said, it was way more organized than if you were to go onto a dark web forum where you have to kind of like source from all these different threads. Telegram, it was organized that like, hey, you go to this person if you want to buy credit card numbers and information. You go to this group if you want to buy Stealer logs. You go to this group if you want to buy a botnet. And so it really kind of not only brought the dark web a little bit more public facing, but almost organized it to an extent, which I found very intriguing in the research.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna add on to that a little bit. One of the things that I think is the most interesting about Telegram is how the channels are so specific about what they're doing. So as I've gone through Telegram myself, you end up with channels completely devoted to DDoS, channels completely devoted to bank leaks. My favorite personal channel I've come up, well, I have a few, but I think anybody who studies Telegram has to have a favorite channel. I think it's a requirement of the job.
Yeah.
But there's one channel specifically called Free Bread. And I'm going to give you guys a hint. They're not giving out bread. They're actually giving out credit card numbers.
Yes, that was one of them that, yeah.
And the other great one is Overcome Poverty, but not through hard work and diligence. It's just by stealing other people's money. So you have all of these channels, and as you're building your kind of channel collection, there's going to be obvious ones when you're searching through channels. There's going to be channels that say like fulls, which is like a term for like somebody's full information. So they're giving out like sets of information. There's going to be channels about DDoS and botnets, but then there's also going to be kind of channels that have more generic names that are more difficult to find. And so a lot of coverage that we've built isn't actually just from searching fulls or credit card or logs or dumps or these kind of really common terms. They're actually from searching through existing channels and then following these spider webs of links to other channels where threat actors are linking to, maybe it's AJ's Market. And, you'd never, if you just search market on Telegram, you're going to find a million results, and it's going to be like finding a needle in a haystack. So instead, you can go through channels and actually find like specific links to other channels, which can then be you can follow along and find interesting results.
Yeah, and to expand on that a little further, one of the common things on how I was able and the team was able to, and even you, Eric, a lot of people share in these channels. Like it's an open communication channel in order for other criminals to share with one another. So say somebody starts their own carding group or DDoS group, right? They can share that in a relative channel in order to actually gain traffic into that channel in order to increase their own profitability for their own fraud going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think this also goes back to the direct to consumer business model, right? On dark web marketplaces and forums, your reputation as a threat actor is less important because there is a seemingly trusted middleman acting as an escrow service between the vendor and the purchaser. For Telegram, though, reputation is absolutely everything. Because if you are scamming people will not buy from your shop. There's actually threat actor scamming channels that have been set up where you can go and say, oh, this person scammed me. I tried to buy, 10 bank accounts from them and they didn't send them to me. And I'm out $200 in Monero. So Telegram, because of that direct-to-consumer business model, the buyers have to have a lot of trust in the sellers that they're actually getting something legitimate. So you'll see as kind of a corollary, there's all of these reputation channels that have been set up where people are sharing like, oh, this buyer is legitimate. Oh, this buyer is not legitimate. They're a scammer, etc. So there truly is no honor among thieves is I think the really critical thing to mention here.
Definitely.
The next two types of channels we want to talk about are SIM swapping and user data logins and combo lists. And I think these are really, really, really critical for security teams. Obviously bank accounts, credit card numbers, these are really critical for financial fraud teams. But the SIM swapping and user data logins and combo lists can really affect almost any company in the world. So I'm going to give a quick overview of what SIM swapping and combo lists are, and then we'll talk a little bit about the specific channels and how they work. So SIM swapping, it essentially is attackers can use this to swap out a SIM card and bypass two-factor authentication by getting the text code directly to the phone. This is really critical because obviously a lot of companies really rely on 2FA and MFA, especially with how many passwords are floating around the dark web to keep their accounts safe. And so identifying, if a threat actor is trying to SIM swap your company is very, very important. We'll also find a lot of the major telcos will use SIM or monitor SIM swapping channels. The second one is perhaps even more important, especially for the average security user. So these are user data logins and combo lists. We see this very, very common. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of combo list channels set up. Typically what they're doing is they're distributing, they'll say, okay, here's a person's full name, here's their email address, and here's some passwords that they're using. And they'll either paste this in plain text into the, just directly into the Telegram chat. So like literally anybody going through that Telegram channel can find usernames and passwords, or what they'll do is they'll give it away in files. So they'll put a specific file in the channel and say, okay, this is 100,000 people from Sweden combo list that has their email address and password to their email address associated with it. The other thing that's really important. So first of all, this is a great reason to monitor, if you're using a threat intelligence tool, or even if you're just doing some kind of manual Telegram collection, this is a great reason to monitor people's personal email addresses. Because if you had your corporate executives, your CTO, your CISO, your CEO, and their email address and password, even if it's their personal email address and password gets leaked out, that still represents a vector that a threat actor can compromise, especially if they reuse that same password, which, let's be honest, most people at major corporations do across other corporate logins. It doesn't take much for that threat actor to say, okay, well, I'm going to go look up this company on Zoom info. I'm going to find the CEO's, work email address, and I'm just going to take the password from the CEO, combine it with the work email address, and go try to log into corporate applications that they may have access to. So combo lists we really see is where basically threat actors are combining all of this data together, and they're really picking high value targets. Did you have anything you would like to add, Amanda, to that?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I do want to emphasize here with the SIM swapping, because I have actually had this happen to me in the past, not the SIM swapping, but some people do get it misconstrued with somebody else using your phone number. It's not necessarily the exact same thing. So like SIM swapping is they're basically taking over your phone number, your account, and everything in order for them to possibly access the multi-factor or two-factor authentication through SMS. So I did want to emphasize that because I have had my phone number used illicitly previously, but it was not in a SIM swapping situation. So I think a lot of people do get the two misconstrued, but SIM swapping is they're essentially like you lose access to your number and you start having weird random scenarios happening in which if someone's like using your number versus SIM swapping, it's kind of like different in so many ways. So, and then the user data, like the combo list type situation, it's important to note that this can happen both on a professional level and a personal level. I saw on some of the illicit Telegram channels, they were giving away literally Netflix account logins. And if you know everything that's going on with Netflix, of course, they don't really allow people to share passwords anymore. So it's probably going to mitigate this issue a little bit on some platforms that don't allow that, but it can still happen on a professional level, like you said. And yes, I agree with what you said about how, you do still want to monitor some of your C-suite level, even personal accounts, because a lot of people these days have everything tied together and we don't realize we have everything tied together, but we do. And if one thing gets compromised, it can create this whole domino effect to lead to a company-wide data breach. If your CISO or C-suite individual possibly has their personal email address somehow affiliated with their professional email address or any kind of like login connections that may be going on within the company.
Yeah, I think really, Amanda, this speaks to the importance of really conducting robust monitoring across like personal email addresses, like names, etc., because you can end up in a really, really bad situation, even if you're just monitoring for corporate. So this really, I think, makes a great case to expand your monitoring and really look for kind of any vector across a lot of different sources. One of the other areas that I want to talk about here that we don't actually have included in the presentation is what I call logs channels. So typically and when we say logs, what we're really referring to is stealer logs. So this is where a company or an individual, has been infected with stealer malware, usually Redline, Raccoon, VDAR. It steals their browser fingerprint, which includes all of the saved passwords in the browser, along with like operating system data, along with clipboard data, basically everything. That's a remote access Trojan, so almost anything they can get off of the computer. But the real valuable part is that browser fingerprint that includes all of those saved logins. And then these are given out or sold in Telegram channels. And this is another really, really critical area. So when we look at stealer logs, everybody knows at this point, I would hope, Genesis Market, which has, which made the news a lot because at least the clear web clone was taken down a few weeks ago. But we also see stealer logs sold on Russian Market and then the dark web clone of Genesis Market. And then we also see logs given out in Telegram. And to give the audience an idea of how many logs we see given out in Telegram, we import about 1 million logs into Flare's platform every week. 75% of those come from Telegram and not from a dark web marketplace. So Telegram, we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of logs posted per week. And then there's really two types of channels that are given out in. So you'll have like these logs channels. They have weird names like cloud logs, all sorts of different stuff.
Right.
And they'll just be sending files of 500 gigabytes that just have literally tens of thousands of like users, individual users, like usernames and passwords. So millions of sets of usernames and passwords. And in a lot of cases, we see threat actors are just like picking through these and trying to find like Netflix logins, NordVPN logins, like really, really basic consumer stuff. We do think there's a subset of threat actors who are picking through logs and looking for like corporate emails and corporate credentials that they can use to establish initial access and then resell on like these kind of top tier IAB forums like Exploit.in or XSS. So that's kind of part one. And then part two, which is in some ways even more interesting, is the way they monetize it, right? It's not great for them to be just giving all these logs away for free, but there's always some kind of angle to make money off of it. And so we see a second set of channels that are invite only, so you can't get into them unless you've been invited. They typically cost between $100 and $300 a month. And what we're really looking for there is they'll max out at about 15 users. So they'll say, we'll only invite 5 people, 10 people, 15 people. And these people get priority access to all of the logs. And then they'll post tens of thousands of logs per week into these channels. So, it's like a MRR subscription model, basically. They get 10 people to sign up for $200 a month. They get paid $2,000 a month, usually in Monero, Bitcoin. Monero is typically the one we see at this point. And then they just continually post logs into these channels. And we think that IABs and kind of like the more sophisticated threat actors looking for corporate access probably like really specialize and focus on monitoring those specific channels to get those kind of initial access credentials. Amanda, was there anything else you wanted to say there?
The only thing I wanted to add to, one of the things that I found intriguing about Telegram whenever we were conducting the research for this project is the amount of sharing that occurs in a lot of these channels. So there's some channels out there that actually are pretty much dedicated to just kind of like providing evidence of their schemes. And I found that was probably in the beginning parts of the research that we dove into. I found that personally intriguing because it was almost like they were hyping each other up in order to commit more fraud and more schemes. In addition to that, another thing that I found intriguing was, aside from the Russian hacktivism, there was a lot of like almost training and like opportunities for like lower level petty crime or petty criminals to actually be able to learn some of the bigger stuff in order to do like a big scale data leak. And I found that highly intriguing in some of these channels because that's not something I remember seeing previously on the dark web. Like it was basically some of the forums were just kind of like sharing their exploits from what I had seen previously without like actually training each other. So there were actually some instances where they were offering trainings to other cyber criminals like, hey, do you want to learn how to be a better hacker? Great, you can join this group in order to learn more hacking skills so then you can do this yourself. And it was just interesting. this is going to sound funny when I say this, it almost made it feel like it was a cybercrime like MLM to an extent. If that makes sense to anybody, that it was like you had like the top level cyber criminals who kind of have been at this for a while, know what they do, know what they're doing, and they're training all the lower level cyber criminals in order to be better at what they're doing. I found that highly intriguing from a motivational standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm going to switch over actually for a moment and do kind of a live talk about a different type of channel, which is Russian hacktivism channels, which we've seen quite a few of. So this is Cybercrime Telegram, and here we're in the channel Killnet. So basically, Killnet is a channel focused on hacking NATO countries and Ukrainian companies. And really, they're looking around like critical infrastructure, banking, finance, like really, really critical stuff. Now, one of the really big and interesting parts, and there's several channels associated. This is not the only channel. I'm just showing you kind of like one of the primary channels. There's really several parts associated with these Russian hacking channels. So it's really quite an interesting ecosystem. So we suspect that some of them have probably been set up by the GRU, the FSB, et cetera. But then they're kind of crowdsourcing cyber attacks. So anybody can join the channels, anybody can participate in the DDoS attacks. There's probably some kind of inner click that it launches more sophisticated attacks, maybe not necessarily with Killnet, but with other channels. But this is like one of the areas. There's another group, for instance, called Anonymous Sudan, right? And they're allegedly Sudanese. They speak a mix on the channel of Russian and Arabic. And one of the interesting things is we suspect they actually may have been set up by the Russian government, even though it's Anonymous Sudan, as a way to kind of show involvement of other countries into Russia's war with Ukraine. So there's this whole kind of sophisticated ecosystem where you have these like hacktivist channels like Killnet, like Anonymous Sudan, like No Name 47 is another good example, that will launch mostly DDoS attacks and website defacements, although we've seen a few data leaks, against kind of like critical infrastructure in NATO countries, against honestly, against any NATO company or any company operating in a NATO country that they can find. And it's kind of this really unique playbook where you have this like crowdsourcing of cybercrime targeted for geopolitical reasons against specific organizations that's all operating out of a modern social media platform, which I personally just find kind of endlessly fascinating that this is happening in this way.
Definitely. And to expand on that further, this is one of the channels that we researched in this project, and expanded on even further beyond just this main report. There's a lot of recruiting that goes on. They definitely, on these Russian hacktivist channels, they definitely intend on trying to grow their presence in order to conduct more attacks against organizations. So I find that with a lot of these illicit Telegram channels that especially when involved with Russian hacktivism and things like that, that was another kind of motivation behind them, is they want more people to help them so they can conduct more attacks and, basically do more damage at the end of the day.
Yep, absolutely. A couple other just like I'll call them honorable mentions is we do see some ransomware gangs operating out of Telegram. That doesn't seem to be as common anymore, or not anymore. It doesn't seem to be as common as kind of other groups operating on Telegram, and we still see a lot of those operating on traditional dark web markets and forums. Yep. And then the other kind of type or like category of channel that's worth mentioning are like data leak channels. So we do see some channels like devoted entirely to data leaks. Like there's a group called Siege Sec that is notorious for this, where they're basically just hacking into companies either for political motivations or financial motivations and just leaking their data onto specific Telegram channels via files. So I did want to kind of briefly mention those two. And so how can you minimize these issues for your organization? Well, I'm going to go off script here for a minute and just say in this list, the most important thing you can do is monitor Telegram. Extensively monitor Telegram. Work with your vendor to identify the right channels to monitor for you. There's going to be very specific, because the channels are so specific, no vendor is going to have complete coverage over everything. So make sure that you proactively work with your vendor, identify the important channels, and work with them to make sure that they have monitoring on those channels. Obviously, increase access control measures, authentication, multi-factor authentication, endpoint security, employee security testing, kind of all of these basic cybersecurity recommendations. But like really, I think in the view of a lot of us, it's really getting that external monitoring into Telegram, into traditional Tor, And then as a third point, into environments like public GitHub, into environments where employees might leak data and expose data for initial access. Because I think one of the big findings for us has been, as we've done this type of research, most cyber criminals are not particularly sophisticated. Most cyber criminals are not setting up really dedicated attack infrastructure, custom coding malware, and then sending it to you. Most cyber criminals are buying ransomware from one of the ransomware groups, or they're buying stealer malware from a lifetime license from a Telegram channel, and they're looking for the easiest possible way to distribute that. And so if you have developers who are committing to an open source project on public GitHub and they've exposed credentials, like there's a great in for a threat actor right there. So ensuring that you kind of understand your attack surface, you're monitoring the outside of your environment, both on a threat actor, from a threat actor perspective, but also from a human error perspective, and you're proactively remediating those issues, is one of the key ways to reduce risk of having your information show up on a data leak Telegram site or a ransomware blog. We would love to take any questions from the audience at this point, if there are any. How do you see Telegram threats evolving on the platform? I mean, generally speaking, we're kind of witnessing a migration from traditional Tor sites to illicit Telegram channels. So I think that's going to continue. I think the scope and just volume is going to continue to increase, especially given its ease of use. And I suspect we'll probably see even more and more ransomware gangs operating off of Telegram channels. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not necessarily. I couldn't agree more with that. I was actually, whenever I first dove in, a little surprised with how easy it was in order to get stuff set up, in order to join a channel. And I feel like this is going to be a greater problem in the future for a lot of companies, a lot of people personally, because let's be honest here, no business has the time to sit around and monitor 4,000 plus Telegram channels. They've got their own business operations that they have to continue and work through. So I do think Telegram is going to continue to be a problem in the foreseeable future. So yes, it's something important to think about, especially for an infrastructure type of organization, in order to, emphasize brand protection. I mean, your protection for your employees' credentials, data leaks, and all that other information.
Yeah, absolutely. And Thomas, to answer your question, generally, we don't see it as particularly high risk to visit Telegram. I mean, Telegram is an app that's used for a lot of non-illicit purposes as well. Typically, the advice I would give, and do take this with a grain of salt, is as long as you're not directly downloading things from Telegram, and as long as you're not, we obviously don't interact with threat actors on Telegram, you should generally be fine. I think the risks are mainly if you're downloading things. Even, for example, like it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with sealer logs, right? So you have gigabytes of sealer logs being given out in channels. They're just file downloads. The thing we find is a lot of threat actors will include stealer malware in the stealer logs files to infect people who download the stealer logs files and then resell their information. So there's a huge risk to downloading anything off of cybercrime Telegram channels, and obviously there are legal risks and consequences for interacting with threat actors and that sort of thing. I can't speak to phone numbers, Thomas. I would I would check with your information security team on that one. I don't want to give any kind of prescriptive advice. I would just say that generally speaking, we don't see massive amounts of risk, at least from a cybercrime or information technology risk.
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
We will be speaking. All right, so I think we've answered the questions. We will be sending out the slides. Obviously, Flare automates external risk monitoring, so we look for both human error across the public clear web, so things like public GitHub, paid over 18, 19 pay sites, and then we also look at the dark web and Telegram. So we monitor over 4,000 Telegram channels, and we also look at hundreds of Tor marketplaces, ransomware blogs, and forums, all in one easy-to-use platform that sets up and integrates into your security program in about 30 minutes. So if you have any interest in trying Flare out, doing a proof of concept, please reach out to us. Oh, I see we have one more question. Do you see any push from government entities to be stricter on Telegram to shut down illicit activity? Not really. Telegram is hosted, I want to say, in the United Arab Emirates, and we don't see, I don't think We haven't seen any push for governments to ban Telegram or to restrict it in any way, so it doesn't seem to be a primary issue. We also see very, very little, if any, moderation from Telegram, the company itself.
I know that in some of the research that we did, you can report channels. However, where that goes and what that does and I scoured their terms of service to even see like if there was any kind of like reporting process and how they handle or mitigate issues like this. And there really wasn't a clear-cut definition of if you report a channel, we'll investigate it and take it down. Yeah, it doesn't look like they have, I mean, I hate to shade Telegram, but it doesn't look like they have any kind of vested interest to actually like actively mitigate the issue. So that's when providers like us can help you mitigate those issues a little bit more successfully.
Yep. And then the last question we have is, do you see carding channels to remain the most popular over time, or do you think they will change? Honestly, I suspect like combo-less channels, carding channels, these really low-level, easy-to-use cybercrime channels are probably going to remain the most popular, right? When you think of cyber criminals, you can almost think of it as a pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid, you're going to have people who really have very little technical ability. They have very little cybercrime ability, and they're just looking for like, okay, what is the username and password I can log into? Or what is a credit card number I can go use to buy something online and ship it to a random address, right? They're going to be looking for the easiest possible thing. And honestly, that's 90%, probably more, of cyber criminals are people who are not very sophisticated. They are not very good with technology. They're just looking for easy ways to commit kind of what I would call like petty crime or basic crime. But then as you go up that pyramid, at the very top, you get folks like the initial access brokers that operate on Exploit, on XSS, and really like establish access to companies, whether it's through Stealer logs or whether it's through other methodologies, and then resell that. I'd sometimes even expand the access and then resell that access sometimes to ransomware affiliates who then go in and distribute ransomware. So there's this really, really complex technical ecosystem. I think the vast majority of Stealer log use cases, of carding channels, etc., is just like catering to this low level of cyber criminal. Whereas when you get more and more sophisticated cyber criminals, it becomes a much smaller piece. All right, I think that is all the questions we have. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. We really appreciate it. We will be sending out the slides, and our recording also will be available on YouTube. Please feel free to add myself or Amanda on LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your time this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you.